Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on my series, INFJ and ISTP relationships. So today's topic is going to cover comparing and contrasting the INFJ and ISTP. So I'm choosing to talk about these two personality types because I am an INFJ, my husband is an ISTP. INFJs and ISTPs tend to attract one another, and from my experience, I just haven't really been able to find a lot of very thorough content on this type of relationship. So I figured I'll do some research, I'll compile it, as well as throw in a little bit of insight from my own relationship and see what that dynamic looks like whenever an INFJ and an ISTP get together. So let's first talk briefly about who the INFJ is. So INFJ stands for introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging. Introverted doesn't necessarily mean that we're antisocial, but we just get drained being around people for too long of a period of a time, and we get energized by time alone. Intuitive means that we're always searching for the greater meaning of things or the underlying theme of everything, and we're connecting the dots, we're reading between the lines. We're dreamers, we're visionaries, we're idealistic. Feeling means that we make decisions based off of our feelings or the feelings of those around us. Judging means that we like to plan ahead. We like to have a broad overview of information. We don't get too caught up in the small details. We're very outcome driven and goal driven. And we like to make as many decisions upfront as possible before jumping into action or before getting started on a project. So now let's talk about the ISTP. ISTP stands for introverted, sensing, thinking, and perceiving. So again, introverted means that you have a short social battery, you get drained being around too many people for too long of a period of a time. Sensing means that you're down to earth, you just live in the moment, you can appreciate things in your immediate environment and what's going on in your immediate environment. So because of this, sensing types tend to be very handy, they tend to be very crafty because of their ability to hone in on what's in front of them at that present moment. Thinking means making decisions based off of what's logical, what's efficient, what's practical. Perceiving, I feel, is most easily described comparing it to judging. If you're a perceiving type, you tend to be more spontaneous. You tend to have random bursts of intense efforts towards a project or a goal versus judging types who prefer slow but consistent effort towards a goal or a project. So because of this, perceiving types are better at improvising in the spur of the moment. So at this point, if you're just looking at the letters, you're probably thinking INFJs and ISTPs are total opposites. They only have that one letter that is in common. But if you dig deeper into MBTI and Jungian theory, you'll find that personality types aren't explained solely by the letters, but are actually better described by their cognitive functions and the order of those cognitive functions in the cognitive stack. So let's define those terms. Cognitive function means the different ways in which we prefer to process information from either within ourselves or from the world around us. Every personality type uses different cognitive functions. Cognitive functions are intuition, sensing, feeling, and thinking, and they will either be derived and processed internally, referred to as introverted, or they will be derived and processed externally, referred to as extroverted. So I'll give some examples later, but in addition to everyone having 4 preferred cognitive functions that we primarily use, we use them in a cognitive stack. So cognitive stack pretty much means the preference and order in which we prefer to utilize our cognitive functions. So the first 2 functions in our cognitive stack will be a little bit stronger, but then the last 2 are cognitive functions that are important for us, but they're a little bit less developed, and we have to work a little bit harder and force ourselves to use them. So let's talk about the INFJ and ISTP's cognitive stacks. So an INFJ's cognitive functions are as follows in the following order: introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. The ISTP's cognitive functions are introverted thinking, extroverted sensing, introverted intuition, and extroverted feeling. So going back to our conversation earlier, when you look at the letters INFJ and ISTP, just the letters look very different. But when you look at the cognitive functions, which is really the meat of who these personality types are, INFJ and ISTPs start to look a lot alike. We have all the same cognitive functions, but just in a different order. So here's another analogy for you. So INFJs and ISTPs are like laptop versus a smartphone. So both have the same functions and capabilities. Both are used to surf the internet, both can make audio and video calls, and both are capable of drafting documents. But a laptop would be preferable for drafting documents because it has a keyboard that you could type on faster. And then next, it would be best used for surfing the internet because it has a larger screen and provides better visibility. And then finally, even though it has the capability to make calls, you probably wouldn't go through the trouble of booting up your laptop just to make a call. On the other hand, the smartphone is mobile. It's readily available to be used to make phone calls whenever and wherever you decide to make a phone call. And secondly, it could be used to surf the internet if you don't mind the smaller screen and if you prefer the convenience of a handheld device. And then lastly, even though the smartphone has the capability to draft documents, it's just easier to do documentation on a laptop because that laptop has that keyboard that you could type a lot faster. So again, this isn't a perfect analogy when it comes to comparing and contrasting the INFJ and ISTP and how the INFJ and ISTP both have the same cognitive functions but just in different orders. But I hope you get the idea. So let's talk about the INFJ again, this time in terms of their cognitive function. So INFJs are introverted, intuitive, feeling, judging. Their cognitive stack is introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. So because their dominant cognitive function is introverted intuition, their intuition is derived and processed internally. So they'll often be lost in their daydreams, thinking about things that have happened in the past and how they relate to things that are happening in the present or things that will happen in the future, drawing patterns about why things happen and what's the meaning behind everything. So they're very deep thinkers and they have a very rich inner life, but they don't just share that inner world with just anybody because they feel most people wouldn't get it. You probably got confused just listening to me explain introverted intuition. Like, is that really a thing? Like, do people really do that? It's kind of like a schizophrenic thing. It's hard to explain and it's hard to understand if you don't have it. Not a lot of people understand introverted intuition, but this is the dominant function for INFJs. So INFJs kind of just keep it to themselves. They don't really talk about it. And because of this, people will perceive the INFJ as kind of like dull or boring or shy because the richest part of themselves is something that they don't know how to explain. So their secondary function is extroverted feeling. So their feelings will be derived externally and they will outwardly express their feelings, and they're concerned about the feelings of those around them, and they make decisions based on how their decisions will impact everybody around them or how people around them will feel. They want to make people happy and at peace. They want to emotionally support people. They're very warm and sentimental and caring people. Because their third cognitive function is introverted thinking, they will want to develop a mental framework of how the world works and how different systems affect other systems. So their final cognitive function is extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing has to do with navigating the physical world. Hence the word sensing, because we have to use our five senses: touch, taste, sight, hearing, and smell. It's all stuff that you get from external stimuli. So keep in mind that since this is their fourth cognitive function, this one is the weakest. So going back to the analogy about the laptop versus the smartphone, just like the laptop has the capability to make calls, that doesn't mean that we would necessarily think to reach for our laptop whenever we need to, like, say, call in sick for work. So in the same way, extroverted sensing is important for the INFJ, but they actually kind of dread having to utilize it, and they're not very good at utilizing it. They will not be very good at navigating the external world. And I'm not just talking about physical stuff like going hiking or exercising. INFJs don't like to do those either, but I'm talking about everyday tasks that require you to be like physically present in the moment. So like paying bills, doing chores. INFJs have a really hard time balancing that, because they're big picture thinkers. They just think about like results and like how things should be. They just think about, I need to wear clothes, but then they don't really think in retrospect like, but I need to wash my clothes so that I will have clothes to wear. They're just thinking about like the end result. And conversely, the INFJ's dominant function is introverted intuition. So they prefer to just live in their own thoughts. Because they are introverted intuition dominant, but extroverted sensing inferior, people will say that INFJ is the least practical of all the types. They're often deemed the lazy type because they want to just fantasize all day and they don't want to have to deal with the real world. So let's talk about the ISTP in terms of their cognitive functions. So ISTP is introverted sensing, thinking, perceiving. Their cognitive stack is introverted thinking, extroverted sensing, introverted intuition, and extroverted feeling. So their dominant function is introverted thinking. And thinking in MBTI doesn't mean thinking like thinking with your mind. Thinking refers to like problem solving or organizing information. So ISTPs are always subconsciously collecting data in their minds on how the world works, and they're organizing this information in their head. So to them, the world is like one big system made up of a bunch of smaller subsystems, and they want to understand how all of those smaller subsystems work and how they contribute to like the overall system. And this is why they make really good engineers, mechanics, surgeons. The ISTP is often nicknamed the mechanic because they crave to have knowledge of how everything operates, how they operate independently as well as how they operate together. So dominant introverted thinking means that these people are very logical, they're very fact-driven, but this also tends to make them disregard unseen things like feelings and emotions. And it's not their fault. They're not being insensitive on purpose. It's just that they were wired in their own different way. They're wired in a way where they filter out unseen things and they want to just look at facts and what is going to provide good outcomes. Because their secondary cognitive function is extroverted sensing, they're able to tune in to their external environment. They're very keen about their environment. They can look at their environment like it is just an extension of themselves. So this will make them very good at manipulating things in their physical surroundings. So they'll be very handy, they'll be very good at crafts, they'll be good at building, they'll be good at troubleshooting, being able to take things apart and put them back together and make them better than what they were before. Because their third function is introverted intuition, they will want to be able to connect the dots in the same way that INFJs do. They want to be able to see like the deeper meaning of things, or like the greater meaning. But again, this is their third function, so this function is a little bit weaker. And finally, their fourth function is extroverted feeling, which means that they value an environment where everyone is in harmony and at peace with one another. But just like the laptop isn't perfectly ideal for making phone calls, even though it has that capability, ISTPs will have a hard time with extroverted feeling and like displaying their emotions and handling the feelings of others. So I'm sure at this point you're like, so are they similar or are they different? Which one is it? So the very clear answer is yes and no. So unfortunately, like everything else in life, there's no simple answer. There isn't a lot of black and white. Everything is mostly gray. INFJs and ISTPs are very similar, but they are also very different too. So I hope that this video gave you a lot of good insight into INFJs and ISTPs and how they compare and contrast. I made this video today about comparing and contrasting INFJs and ISTPs because this is the first video in a series that I'm going to be making about INFJ and ISTP relationships. This topic is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm an INFJ, my husband is an ISTP. We have a lot of ups and downs, just like any other relationship. But during our downs, I have really had to do a lot of painful soul searching, not just about myself, but about my partner as well. And the pain and soul searching and being able to better understand myself and my husband has really been the pinnacle of our relationship. It has really helped to strengthen me as a person and strengthen our relationship. I believe that we wouldn't have the understanding that we do if it were not for utilizing MBTI to objectively realize who we are, understanding our similarities and our differences, understanding one another's functions and tendencies. So today was very technical and just kind of like basic level 101 information. But if you want more information about the INFJ and ISTP, look for more of my upcoming videos. We're going to talk more about INFJ and ISTP relationships. Hopefully these series will give you a lot of insight and clarification for anyone else who is in an INFJ-ISTP relationship, or just anyone who has the same relationship patterns that we do. So I look forward to hanging out with you guys more. See you next time.